The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, that is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, in payment of the debt. At that the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had the fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now, when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant as I had pity on you?' Then in anger his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives your brother from the heart." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The first reading from the book of Sirach talks a lot about forgiveness and gives us some wonderful images of what it's like to not forgive, to have wrath and anger and to hold on to grudges in our hearts. One phrase, they say, "Wrath and anger are hateful things, yet the sinner hugs them tightly." So that idea of holding on to and hugging tightly our wrath and our anger. Elsewhere in that reading it says, "A man nourishes his anger against others." So the idea of feeding and giving life to our wrath and our anger and our grudges. Then the final image in the book of Sirach says, he who is but flesh cherishes his wrath. So he looks forward to his wrath, not just hugs it tightly, but cherishes it, something that he loves and holds on to. Great images, and I think very true maybe in your own life and in your own personal experience. Maybe you hold tightly to your wrath and to your anger and onto grudges. Say, "Nope, I'm not going to let these go. No one's going to take them away from me. I want to hold on to my wrath and my anger. I want to hold on to this grudge. I don't want to let it go, at least not yet." Maybe you nourish your anger so that it will stay alive, right? Lest it die if you don't nourish it. This way, when you nourish it, it stays alive and it continues to grow in your heart. And maybe you feed your grudges, maybe you feed your anger by reflecting on them periodically, reflecting on the hurt and the injustice. Maybe you turn it around and around in your mind so you can get angry from every different perspective, right? Looking at it from every different possible angle. Maybe you talk to others about your grudge so that they'll agree with you, so you have some kind of people on your side. Kind of adds fuel to the fire. And maybe they'll encourage you in your wrath. "Wow, that was a horrible thing that was done to you. How could you possibly ever forgive that person?" So maybe you nourish your wrath against others lest it die. Maybe you cherish your wrath. Maybe you cherish your grudges. The idea of wearing them to some extent like a badge of honor. That it's something you're proud of because you survived that experience. And now you can talk all about it as well. And so maybe you cherish your wrath and you cherish your grudges with the idea of, "Look, everyone, look at the injustice that was done to me. Look at the offenses that I've taken and I've survived. Take my side and feel pity for me, even as I feel pity for myself." And so if you're proud of your grudges, proud of your wrath, and you hold on to them, of course you would not want to let them go in any way whatsoever. So maybe you hug tightly, you nourish, and you cherish your anger and your grudges. holding on to them as the years go by. And maybe not just as the years go by, but maybe as decades go by, right? Maybe you've held on to some anger and some grudges for decades. Maybe more for half of your life or for the greater part of your life, you've held on to many things. And it's hard to let it go, but yet maybe in some ways you've sustained those and kept them going, and maybe to some extent even welcomed them in your life. But holding on to anger and holding on to a grudge, it kills you slowly, right? Like any other parasite, it lives off of its host. In some ways, our greed, our wrath, and our anger and our grudges feed on us. And maybe you keep those alive, but it comes at the expense of your complete joy. To keep alive a grudge comes at the expense of your peace and your calm. It comes at the expense of your sleep sometimes. Comes at the expense of tension and stress in your life. Comes at the expense, too, of your physical health. And that's what a grudge does. That's what a grudge and that's what anger consume. All those things. And so the book of Sirach talks about forgiveness as the antidote to all that, as the way out of it. It talks about forgiveness as being essential for healing, for having some kind of healing and closure in our life. Talks also about how if we want forgiveness from God, we need to look for forgiveness. We need to forgive one another as well. And so maybe looking at from the book of Sirach what we do in opposite of those three things, of hugging tightly and nourishing and cherishing. So don't hug tightly. Instead, let go of your wrath, let go of your grudges. Jesus' prayer from the cross is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. To some extent, in place of his own forgiveness, Jesus asks his Father to forgive. Jesus' prayer isn't, I forgive them. His prayer is, Father, you forgive them. Maybe the idea of saying, Father, don't let me hold on to this offense against me. Don't let me remember this sin forever. Forgive them so that one day I too might be able to forgive them as well, just as you have done. In the beginning, when we're hurt first, sometimes we're not quite ready or capable of complete forgiveness. But at least we're not hugging it tightly, the sin against us, the offense. We're unembracing to some extent, and we're asking for God's help so that at least eventually I will be able to forgive. So don't hug and hold tightly your anger or your grudges. Let those go. Secondly, don't nourish your wrath or your grudges. Starve them. Instead of nourishing them, starve them so that they die. The saying in English is to forgive and forget. It's not biblical at all. It's nowhere in the Bible. And to some extent, when we remember the offense done to us, we often keep it alive, actually a little bit longer. We actually feed it a little bit more. However, it's really not healthy to forget the offenses that were done to us. That's not healthy. As if we could pretend they didn't happen, or even worse, pretend that they didn't hurt us. And so the challenge is really not forgetting. The challenge is to remember the offenses, but from a different perspective. To remember the person, but from a different angle. So forgiveness is often made possible by seeing the wrongdoer from another perspective. And maybe you see the person in some ways as similar to yourself. What he or she did to you might be similar to what you may have done to others in the past too. Jesus' prayer, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, to some extent he makes an excuse for them. They don't know what they're doing. It's not completely their fault. And whether that's the case for the wrong that was done to you or not, it's good to remember from a different perspective. So when you forgive, you don't forget, but you remember the incident in a different way. And you no longer reduce the person who hurt you merely to the deed, the sin, the offense that was committed against you. But you can see the person from another perspective. And that doesn't condone the deed or the offense. It doesn't make it okay. But you see the whole situation as maybe more complex. Not just one motivation of merely to hurt you. And so instead of nourishing a grudge and anger, starve it. Let it go. And then finally, don't cherish wrath, don't cherish a grudge. Instead, divest yourself of that, or maybe undress yourself of that, of the offense against you. If you wear your grudge like a badge of honor in some ways, the offense that was done to you, then leave it behind, divest yourself of it. Maybe in the way that you would take off a coat, leave it on the ground, and walk away from it, and not come back to it again. So forgiveness means that the offense of the past no longer poisons your present or your future. So it's not that you've forgotten it, it's still there, but it doesn't poison today. It doesn't poison tomorrow. Because really that's what anger and grudges do for us, right? They poison our life in the way that we see, certainly that person, but the way that we see, maybe the way we view the world. So the book of Sirach offers us these great images of hugging tightly, of nourishing and of cherishing our wrath and our grudges. We want to do the opposite of that. We always want to try to forgive. It's tempting to hold on to grudges. To some extent, it feels good once you've survived it, and it's to an extent more removed from your present day. Maybe in some ways you even welcome those. However, as time goes by little, you really want to be able to forgive, because it brings greater joy and peace to our lives, in addition to, of course, the Lord forgiving us and it being better for us in some physical ways too. Following communion, there'll be a short little reflection video, just reflecting on the events of 10 years ago, September 11th. It's an opportunity maybe to look at not just what happened then, maybe if you need to apply forgiveness in any way to that situation or not, but also as an opportunity to make it a little bit more personal for you. There are events, I'm sure, over the past 10 years that have hurt you as deeply or worse in some ways, or maybe even closer to home. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on the need for forgiveness in our lives. Jesus is the best model of that. We ask His help and His grace this day that we might be great imitators of Jesus, who forgives people all things, all offenses, in all situations.